Greetings and welcome to the final chat edition of Electric Avenue's YouTube channel for 2021. Coming to you from a more intimate venue, my house, um, just to change it up a little bit. I thought it'd be a little more intimate this way as we've gotten to know each other a little bit this year and just talk about some things that are not necessarily new releases. I feel like I do that every week, and it was a chance for me to kind of talk about some things here. We have a little break, and it's we're coming up on New Year's Eve tomorrow when I recorded this. So if you're celebrating New Year's, thanks. I hope you're all being safe, happy, and healthy. Hearing a lot more stories about people getting ill in this area. So please be safe. It's in all of our best interests. I may touch on that subject a little bit towards the end of this video. So, I thought what might be interesting is to kind of talk a little bit about what were some of the stories of 2021 as far as our store goes here in Pennsylvania in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So, looking down the list, I did a list of what were our biggest sellers of the year. I thought that would be kind of it's always interesting to see what people are actually spending their money on. Our biggest seller this year was Taylor Swift's Red, Taylor's version, which is very interesting. That was number one. And at number three was Taylor Swift's Evermore, which actually came out late 2020 on CD but did not release on vinyl until 2021, if you didn't remember that. And at number 10, also on these are the list of the new releases, we had Taylor Swift's Folklore, which was tied with Sturgill Simpson's second Cut and Grass release. So Taylor Swift was in our top 10 three times. She's from Wyomissing, outside of Reading, which is only about an hour from our store. We have not had the ability to sell Taylor's music on a large scale other than up until, what was it, 1989 or Reputation. We were selling some of her stuff. It wasn't selling in large quantities back then for us, but a lot of young kids were not buying vinyl at the time. So when Target took over her catalog at that point and made exclusive releases of not only Folklore but Lover, a couple other things that they had that those were the main things I believe that we could not get at the time. Seemed sort of unfair that this was happening, and I don't know if that was a decision of her management or what, but now looking at it, it's like, well, you can see that it would have been to every store's benefit on a level playing field to be able to be selling Taylor's records. And so it's been good for us. I hope it's been good for her that some of those kinds of restrictions of who gets to sell what were lifted. Obviously, that's still happening with companies like Urban Outfitters and Newbury Comics, who have a lot of special color pressings of things that other places don't. And on the flip side of that, indie stores, some of them have special pressings that those other places don't. So it goes both ways. But the other big things that were in our top five, so Taylor's Red television, Taylor's version, I say television, was number one. War on Drugs, new record, very strong album, was number two, and then Taylor again at three. Adele's 30 was number four. that actually, we're a couple days now towards the end of the year, and that album has actually had a bit of a surge the last couple days, so it might actually place higher when all is said and done. And at number five was Black Keys Delta Cream, which was a very strong record this summer, made up of mostly covers, blues covers, but it was interesting to see that on there. Rounding out our top 10 was Greta Van Fleet's new release, Royal Blood's Typhoons, Billie Eilish's Happier Than Ever, King Gizzard's Butterfly 3000, and then, as I mentioned, Sturgill and Taylor sharing number 10. Those were the top 10 sort of new releases. And then in catalog stuff, obviously Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, that was sort of a carryover from last year. There came a point during the year, it was like September or so, when we couldn't get Fleetwood Mac's Rumors anymore, and they'd really just run out of them. And so it was like months. I don't think it turned up again until this week. So we had a 3 or 4 month window. It still was the number one catalog release of the year. But, you start thinking, well, how many more of those could I have sold? So I'll get to that topic here in a minute. Anyway, so yeah, like another release that did really well in our area was Cage the Elephant's Melophobia. And one of the members of Cage the Elephant lives in the town that, or is from the town that our store is located in. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I think it's more just kids love Cage the Elephant because they're a great band. So we did sell a lot of that as well. But yeah, on the supply shortage thing, I think that was one of the big stories this year was because of the COVID situation. We did not have access to a lot of things that we could have been selling. So even though I have this list of 10 biggest sellers or whatever of the year, there are things that should be on these lists that either were on them but placed low or lower than they should have. And it was mainly because we couldn't get enough of them. And I'm talking about Phoebe Bridgers, I'm talking about Japanese Breakfast, I'm talking about some Juice World, Mac Miller. There are a couple hip hop artists that we would have, but intermittently, and we could have sold more. Even Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in particular, which placed actually rather high on our list. Yet there were probably 4 or 5 months where we didn't have it at all. And Kanye's sort of a topic of his own, and I'll mention that at some point here too. But yeah, and the new Kid Cudi album came very late in the year. We never got the Tyler the Creator album, the most recent. We never got Silk Sonic's album, which is supposedly, hopefully, coming on vinyl in 2022. And then bands like the Arctic Monkeys, Arcade Fire, Radiohead. We had problems getting all of those things. Even catalog Adele titles were difficult. And I've already mentioned sort of the big problems that we had getting Radiohead's Kid Amnesia, the Kid A Amnesiac reissue, and also the Nirvana reissue of Nevermind, which turned out to be a blessing in a sense because some people didn't like the remastering job done on that, and then we ended up getting some more of the Palace reissue from 2014, which supposedly sounds better. So, a mixed bag of things for sure. Tame Impala's Currents didn't show up till very late in the year. And next year, early next year, they're doing a deluxe edition of the Slow Rush, which is the most recent Tame Impala album. But I don't think I've seen that as a regular edition for probably 6 months. So again, sort of a lot of outages that kind of, they kind of actually distort what the list really should be. So, And mentioning Kanye West just briefly, it's funny seeing him and Taylor Swift so much on these lists together again. But he did release that Donda album this year as a streaming type thing. And I don't know what his deal is. You'd think that someone who complains as much as he does about not getting paid or wanting his money, considering that, Yeezus and Life of Pablo, those are only like bootlegs that are out there if I ever see any of them. And Donda, same way, it's like he didn't take the initiative to release that on vinyl. Yet we got his religious record a couple years ago on vinyl. Kanye, if you're listening or anyone on your team, you guys are missing a lot of golden opportunities, and time is of the essence. So I don't know what else to say about that except it's just maybe the artist being inscrutable. I don't really understand it, but that's sort of its own story, I suppose. Just like the Taylor Swift being such a big a big selling story of the year, especially for an album, mainly for Red, which was an album that's almost 10 years old that she had to re-record just to get the rights back to it, and also adding 14 tracks and an epic 10-minute song. I mean, it was a very shrewd move. I've seen was it Philly artist Dave Hawes did like a little kind of story on that and said it was about the most punk rock thing that anybody's done, and I think he's probably right to take ownership of your own material like that again. So all right. The other big stories of the year that I kind of saw from behind the counter, the Beatles' Let It Be, the whole box set around that, and the deluxe editions and the remixes, and people seem pretty happy with that stuff. I think the box set for that was a little bit better received than maybe the George Harrison All Things Must Pass, because it felt like there was a little bit more in it. So I don't know, Beatles, hopefully they're a little careful about not leaving too many things out. Yeah, there was the criticism that, well, we didn't get the Blu-ray of the documentary, or we didn't get the rooftop concert, and I have a feeling that those things will probably be coming later. And they're going to try and monetize every part of that. So, it'll happen. But that was a big thing. That was our second biggest catalog thing of the year, right behind Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, by the way. The other thing, there was Bowie Box, his 90s stuff, Brilliant Adventure, came out at the end of the year. It had been quite a while since the previous Bowie Box, after having them so regular. And I think in a way they sort of shot themselves in the foot by making it 18 records and $400. They really could have probably sold more of that had it been more reasonable. And I don't know if that was a conscious decision to price themselves out of the market because they knew that they couldn't handle the demand if they had made something that was a little smaller but had to make more of it. I'm hoping that at some point they re-release those albums from that box separately, because I think a lot of people probably are passing on that box. And I've heard it sounds great, it looks great, but I don't understand that. And then to put an unreleased album in there and then decide to release it in its own box set about a month later is another bizarre sort of marketing decision. And it's like they're kind of squeezing every last cent out of that. With Prince, like, we got an unreleased record this year, and then there was no announcement of a box set, so hopefully that's coming in 2022. This was the year, 21 was the year that Tom Petty's Wildflowers kept on giving. We kept selling the reissue from last fall, and then we got Finding Wildflowers released separately, which was the additional material. And then we got Angel Dream around Record Store Day, which was the She's the One material, which was all recorded at the same time. So it was, I can't not mention Tom Petty. That was a pretty big selling story for us this year, all around. I think it was great. And I did mention, Radiohead. I feel like Kid Amnesia could have been a much bigger selling story, but the way they handled it, everybody just either ran to the internet to buy it at the last minute because they couldn't get it in a store hardly. Some stores had it, but it seemed sort of weirdly unfair the way that album was apportioned. And I would say also the same thing of that Nirvana that I mentioned. So those were two kind of like points that left me a little bitter taste, I should say, about how I felt how those were handled. A couple other things that were big this year. We had the return of some artists after a really long absence. One I'll mention that I thought was great was the Robert Plant and Allison Krauss getting back together after 14 years and making another record and touring, at least in the UK so far, or attempting to tour. That was a good effort for them. I don't. It took a while, but it was still like at the time sort of must have felt right. And then the big one was probably Abba, who hadn't made a record in 40 years, and that's an interesting one because it's not really a great album in my opinion. It's not a bad album. It's sort of somewhere in the middle. It feels like if you're going to wait 40 years, you really want to get everything right. And it was about three quarters of the way there. It sounds like a typical sort of earlier ABBA record at times. The last track is sort of uh, um, hmm, could have been a cathartic moment, and it's sort of a little bit of a letdown in a way. And yeah, there are a couple other moments on there that you felt were sort of kind of cobbled together rather than being a really strong statement. So, I say proceed with caution if you're going to do a record after 40 years. Just make sure everything is right. It could have been better. It could have been much worse. So, kudos to them for doing that. Let's see, other things. I think one of the big stories of the year were all the young women that really, I think, were the artistic, um, kind of carried the artistic reins of 2021. And I'm talking not only Taylor, she gets mentioned a lot, and I don't know. I mean, I guess she's a young woman. She and Adele, both pushing over 30 now. Not only are they still considered young women, but they inspired so many of the other young women I think that are on this list this year. And I could mention. Let's see, people. Some of them are people who maybe are just coming out and releasing new music. Others are people who are sort of finding their voice. And I would say people like Billie Eilish, Lord, Halsey, Olivia Rodrigo, who is brand new, really, Japanese Breakfast, Snail Mail. I really loved Weather Station, Indigo D'Souza. Spelling was a great new artist for me. Girl in Red, Little Sims, Laura Mavula, Marissa Nadler, the Boy Genius Trio, Phoebe Bridgers, Julian Baker, Lucy Dacus, Claro, and then the trio of Charlie XCX, Christine and the Queens, and Caroline Polachek. And Charlie's got a new record coming out in March. So I think that, those people are really them, and the people that they're working with and collaborating with. Magdalena Bay is another one that I just heard that I really like. They're really pushing the boundaries of what's pop, what's kind of like even alternative rock. Um, there's so many interesting things happening for women, and I'm glad to see that happen. It comes in waves, but they've always. It sounds like I'm segmenting a whole sex out as like a separate thing, but they really do get unfortunately treated differently in the music business. And after, gosh, all the decades of watching this happen, I feel like what was it, Lilith Fair was the last time that women were really recognized for all of their achievements as sort of like a large voice or something. And I'm buoyed by watching. I'm buoyed, Buoy. I'm inspired by watching all of that happen. So kudos to the ladies. All right. Weird, weird thing happened this year was the constant. Are the tours on or are they off? With all the COVID sort of surrounding that, and sometimes that sort of thing would also affect the sales for an artist because if they couldn't tour, they were not able to sell as many records as they could have. So some of these people that I just mentioned, and I could go on for a while about artists that ended up either having tours or parts of tours canceled or didn't end up releasing records at all when they actually were ready to go. Um, those that was kind of the depressing side of 2021. As positive as a year it was of sales coming back a little bit after a year of lockdowns. And here we are facing another wave of Omicron around the holidays um, of COVID. It's sort of like we feel like we're just going through it all over again in some ways. So, yeah, and all of that affects, not only what people buy, uh, obviously in stores because maybe they don't want to come to stores, but then online sales, some might kind of balance a little of that out, but it never really, for us anyway, being a brick and mortar store, that doesn't really um, equate. So, and there's just so many variables. It's it's a tough time, and but there are silver linings in it too. So, and that being said, like I think we've been very fortunate to be where we are right now. We're in a business that kids have discovered vinyl, and it's been a long time. I've been selling music over 30 years now, and you see it sometimes come in waves, and there's different reasons for that, whether it be um, you know all of a sudden people just happen to get into an artist or the music, and then something like Napster happens, or there's a shift. Streaming happens, and but streaming also leads to a sense of sterility, and you want something that's tangible, as you can see behind me, where you can actually identify, relate with these artists. Their work speaks to you, and you want a physical representation of that, sort of representing not only your listening tastes, but your personality, who you are. One day when you go on from this planet, you have some sort of representation of you that can be shared by others, and that feels like almost like a little bit of a pay it forward moment. So, oh gosh, I'm gonna get choked up if I talk about that. But anyway, so I think those are the big stories of the year for this person who was behind the counter for 99% of the time. The other 1%, I was like trying to figure out, okay, I got to make sure I order blah, blah, blah. It's, it's a lot of like keeping up with that sort of stuff, and then putting your name on a list and hoping that eventually you get that record that you've been sort of like knowing that people have been talking about. Um, the last thing I will say, as far as like the COVID situation, and then I'm not going to talk about it anymore, is I've noticed that because we've had a rise in cases again here at the end of the year, that most people are starting to come back into the store with masks on, even though it's still technically optional. And I find it ironic when, you know, there's people that come in for like an hour and they're just looking at dollar records, and then they leave with like $5 or something, or sometimes nothing. And your response is, look, we've been through like a time where you can be exposed to a deadly illness. The longer the time that you're around, the more exposure you have. And, if you're going to do that, I think right now, probably for us anyway, you know, I'm the only one that works there, is what I'm saying. So if I go down, the ship goes down with me. And that's like one less place for you to go to shop and get your music, and one less experience in the world to have. So I want to thank everybody who's thinking of the proprietors, like, the people like me. I still have been the entire time wearing masks behind the counter. Now, I know this is an anomaly because I'm hyper like careful about that, and there are places in the country that you'll go that people don't care. And I just think, well, it's not really worth putting everybody at risk for that sort of situation. So, um, anyway, that's kind of my little soapbox on that issue. But thank you to everybody who's been so supportive. And, I just hope everybody has a more positive and uplifting 2022. 2021 was a better year than 2020 for sure. In so many ways, it started off kind of crazy, and it did get better, but it's we're still fighting a lot of things out there, and a bunch of things at the same time. So I'm not a preacher or a pastor or anything like that, but my feelings for everybody who's been watching me and supportive of everything we do, I'm sending you my blessings for 2022, and hope that we all can find a little bit more peace and happiness in the coming year, because there have been some dark times for sure. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little chat from my personal domicile. I don't really do much filming from this location. It's kind of difficult, and I still don't feel like the lighting is right. But, it's hard to light this and make it attractive. So, thank you again, and take care. Happy New Year. Happy 2022.